So a pleasant good afternoon, colleagues. Happy Independence, happy July 4, 2021. I did not realize it, Sir Arthur Fitt, that today is the 4th of July in the US. So happy 4th of July. I hope you spend the time well, but at least you look like you'll spend a few minutes with us. So I'm really grateful that you're able to join. Yes, I am Sean Thorpe from the School of Computing and Information Technology here at UTech Jamaica. Welcome to episode 9 of Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership. And this week we are going to be engaged in cybersecurity thought leadership and the rise of ransomware. On our call this afternoon, we have Arthur Fitt, CIO of Reed Jewelers. We have Dr. Claire Craig from UWI campus. Is this in Trinidad or is it in Barbados? In Barbados, yes, in Barbados.
Trinidad and Tobago.
Trinidad and Tobago, that's to be correct. And I have Mr. Bevel Wooding, who is the chair of the Caribbean organization, which deals with everything security. I would say relating to understanding things like internet exchange points and how data traffic commutes over the various networks in our region. So we have an interesting lineup. I have here joining as well Dr. Lynn Forrester, who is Director of Tech at one of the local colleges out in New York. Thank you for coming. I have Miss Carmina MacArthur, who sits on the University of Technology School of Computing board as well with Art in terms of security, but Carmina is also a CIO and CISO herself in security for, what's the name of the company again, Carmina? Is it Airtel? Not Airtel. Just remind me, please, as I go through my introductions, which is a company.
IslandNet.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. I'm not hearing you.
Simply Secure.
Yes, Simply Secure. Thank you. So it's a very interesting lineup of persons joining us today and more people joining. I sincerely thank you for joining wherever you're coming from across the region and in the diaspora. Happy 4th of July for those who are in the US. I recall my own time traveling one 4th of July. I couldn't find anywhere to move around inside Harvard University when I left and went out to go and see the fireworks that one evening. But you know, I figure it's the same sentiment minus the pandemic anxieties. But I'm very happy to have all of you join this evening to engage on a very important topic. And as I share my screen here with you, I'm gonna jump right into a conversation that I think is very important to us all. Now, this is a recorded podcast. It's posted weekly at the University of Technology Jamaica's website. It's posts. I will be redirecting it to you all, but if you go to UTech's post, you will see the outcome. So it's really a national forum. And I sincerely appreciate you and your time to weigh in on this very useful discussion. My co-host on a weekly basis is my colleague, Dr. Arnett Campbell, also at the School of Computing and Information Technology. So where do we begin? Let's start with something I read through Gartner 2021 report. I was just looking at the report. There are a couple of things that jump out quickly. Cybersecurity leadership should have a systematic and holistic view of all the critical applications, services, and assets, and the suppliers to determine the potential consequences of a crisis to their employees, their revenue lines, customers, and the continuity of the relevant services. I say that just as a note to keep it close to our hearts. A quick environmental scan, looking at Gartner's report, is contending that cyber attacks are increasing everywhere. However, there needs to be some balance found between what these risks are in the environment and how you keep moving and pivoting the business forward. Key to that is strong cybersecurity governance. I would argue that that has a lot to do with leadership, a lot to do with leadership. But I'll come back to it in the context of the talk. If anybody needs this Gartner report, it's a recently released report that I was looking at, and it's like a full handbook. I haven't even finished reading it yet, but I can share it before the end of the podcast. So we can use the opportunity of those two highlight bulletins, and I sincerely hope you're seeing my slide deck. You're seeing my slide deck. I do usually how we run the sessions for those who are new to it. It's really a set of questions and we engage in discussions. So at a high level, I would like us to jump in based on those two slides. You don't have to be a rocket scientist now to tell me all of these definitions, but just to get us started, what do we understand by the terms, the bad actors, zero-day attacks, zero trust? You can take anyone on the deck. Cybersecurity, a breach, an incident response. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on these definitions? I don't know if some of them are moving targets, by the way, but you feel free, my dear colleagues, as you have joined and you're joining. Thank you, Sabrina, for joining. I think you're from Jamaica Customs. I think that's where you're calling from. Thank you very, very much for joining, and Brian Fletcher. But as we jump in and as persons weighing on the call, any understanding of these things? What is cybersecurity? And remember, because I have people in podcast land listening to us, I'm just trying to ensure that I put a context to some definitions for their benefits. No disrespect to the experts here, but just to get the rest of the community in sync with what we are doing. So anybody can take a term. Cybersecurity, what are we talking about when we refer to cybersecurity as an underlying thing? What do we talk about when we say incident response or ransomware? What are these things to any of you? Is everyone hearing me? I sincerely hope everyone is hearing me.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
All right, Dr. Campbell, thank you for joining. All right, so we just finished doing the preamble to the session on the whole space of today's theme, cybersecurity, leadership, and the rise of ransomware. And we were just giving a quick context, just for the benefit of all as persons gather their bearings, as they gather their bearings on the main points of what's in the slide deck here. So we were actually looking at the fact that Gartner's report just published the fact that, listen, these attacks will continue. You need to figure out how to balance risk with respect of these attacks and growing the business forward. I probably need to dissect that a little bit more. And the issue of cybersecurity leadership is asking persons who are in the form of these leaderships to look at the critical assets, look at your revenue base, and manage them well as a part of how you drive those outcomes. Those are the two things we were saying earlier. I'm very mindful that because we are in podcast land, I wanted to start the discussion today with just some terms that are out there. If no one is volunteering to define the terms, I will start for you, but I wanted to throw it out to the panel and to the team here if any of these terms resonate with you. So for example, bad actors have to do with the fact that we have these terrorists or hackers, because these days I don't know if you want to call them hackers, it might seem too nice in the academic terms, but I know some persons are referring to them as terrorists. But bad actors are persons who deliberately, maliciously carry out something, really to compromise the organization or the business, and that can extend all the way into government. Zero-day attacks, really, there's no notice of the day of the attacks. There's no history. There is no reference point to the fact that these attacks, when they affect your organization, you have any type of reference data to go by as it relates to what could be happening in your environment. Zero trust is to suggest, as the topical term in computers today, that the networks that are out there are so much subjected to hostile attacks that you should never trust your network. And because it becomes zero trusted, it means a lot of effort now needs to be put in place to provide the required critical infrastructure protection. All right. So I'm going through what persons can stop me and they can give me their views about what this means. But I acknowledge Art, his hand is up, so I'll stop to at least recognize. And thank you again, Art, for joining in on your public holiday. Thank you.
Hey, Sean, I wouldn't miss it for a burger. So
yes, sir.
Maybe for a hot dog.
Good afternoon, Joy. Thank you as well for joining. Thank you.
No, that was Sister Vivian, not Joy. But good afternoon, everyone. My name's Arthur Fidd. As Sean mentioned, I'm the Chief Information Officer at Reed's Jewelers and Reeds.com. Here, head office in beautiful Wilmington, North Carolina. And I'm also on faculty at the UWI's Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business in Trinidad and the UWI Mona School of Business Management in Kingston. Sean, I'd like to, you've kind of gone through the definitions and, but what I want to do is to go back to the Gartner slide.
Oh, yes, the Gartner.
Could you go back? Could you go back?
Okay, just a minute. Hold on. My deck was, I can't actually.
Because I think that's really.
The story
that needs to be told is kind of what Gartner said, which a bunch of us have been saying. And in one of the graduate courses that I teach at Lockjack is IT systems operations and management, and the discussion is less around the technology, which is a commodity, right? And it's more around the people process side of it. There are really three sides to the strategy if you boil down what Gartner is saying. The one that I focus less on is whose firewall am I putting in, and am I using Fortinet or am I using Cisco? That's commodity stuff. The technology has been solved, right? And the fact is, if all it took was technology, then we wouldn't have had all the issues we're having, right? So I de-emphasize that and put more emphasis on the people and process side.
Yes.
Because that's what Gartner is saying. It's a tripart strategy. The combination, your cybersecurity posture is the amalgamation of your people, process, and technology strategies coming together. And for me as a CIO, my focus is primarily on how do I proactively deal with situations before they become a situation, and how do I remediate once they've occurred? Because the truth is they're going to happen, right? And so the discussion has to be, how do you manage that cultural transformation? And I've attended far too many seminars and I've listened to far too many security companies, and I can't get any of these vendors, whether it's Fortinet or Cisco or a big IP or F5, or we can go on, right?
Yes.
Those guys can tell you about the physical implementation and the engineering and the really cool techie stuff.
That's true.
When you talk to our chief executive officers, I'm getting an echo, I'm not sure who it's coming from, but when you speak to the chief executive officers, they have what I call the Charlie Brown syndrome. If y'all have seen the Charlie Brown cartoons, when the
Charlie Brown, yes, that's a long time cartoon. I didn't know you still watch cartoons, Art. What I tell you?
Well, I didn't say I still watch it, but But when the teacher speaks, the kids hear pwah, 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 pwah. And that's what
Yes.
CEOs hear, right? So my focus is how do we educate our decision makers, the people who are responsible for spending the money? How do we get them to understand that if I have $20,000 in CapEx to spend, and I have a choice of spending it on more inventory and sweaters or an AI threat an analyzer platform, which one should I spend it on? By default, they're going to buy more inventory because they understand product, right?
Yes.
They get product. They get how if I sell 10 things at price X, it yields Y. They don't understand if I don't put my cyber strategies in, it yields X.
Yes.
X in costs, opportunity costs, lost businesses, and business opportunities. So it really is a discussion for me anyway, in terms of how do we get people to understand that the strategies and the frameworks and the processes and the changes, the awareness campaigns that you must put in place, that those are just as important as opening a new store or opening a new branch on Main Street. And I think those are the kind of conversations I'd love to hear my colleagues weigh in on.
Yes, very important point you just raised. You know, this is Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership on a Sunday afternoon, July 4, American Independence Day. I will not forget it. Art reminded me today. Thank you. But I think a very salient point that he just raised is not just about the tech here. Probably it's actually more than the tech. That is actually the issue that we are dealing with. So, okay, putting things into perspective, and I see the hands going up. I really appreciate that. Dr. Forrester, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Forrester. I'm the Director of Technology at the Chapin School here in New York.
Yes.
And I'm just following up on what Arthur has just said.
Yes.
Basically, cybersecurity leadership must be a holistic approach. Leaders must have a clear vision with developed actions and steps that they will implement to affect the processes and the technology within the system. And as Arthur said, it's a lot more than just the expertise and the skills, the technical skills that we need.
Yes.
But they must be able to effectively embed cybersecurity strategies into the daily operations of the organization.
Excellent.
What's going on today that we need to do, it cannot be an afterthought, like something you're making a decision about a business model or a business process. The cybersecurity needs to be also at the forefront of these processes.
Yes.
Taking into consideration that cybersecurity leaders are basically protecting the health of the organization, if we would want to call it that way. And therefore, and that method, they also needs to be in a position where they have the opportunity and the space and the will to be able to lead. They should be able to influence their fellow senior leaders so that cybersecurity strategies are taking place alongside the product and the development of all the other things that are happening in the organization at the same time. And not think about, okay, now that we have done this, how do we now protect it? Needs to be going on at the same time that the products are being developed.
This is an excellent point. The takeaway point I'm getting from Dr. Forrester, the vision is extremely important. And I think Art was actually reiterating that point as well earlier. You cannot open a store, right, without thinking about the security mindset here. How natural that is to the present day leadership in any or many organizations that we have, particularly here in the Caribbean too. I would love for others to be weighing in, because if you have a data breach, you know, intentional or unintentional as it may be, where your resources are compromised, I'll be true to ransomware, where, you know, the hackers are literally saying, listen, you opened that business on Main Street, listen, it's my business now. You didn't put in the security. I own everything. You want it back, you have to pay me. It definitely sounds like it's going to come down to the leadership and what the leadership has to say. I'm going to allow persons to weigh in as we go along here. Any more views on this particular point, following up from Dr. Forrester's comment? Excellent comment. Let me just scroll down here to see if I missed any of the comments, please. Missed any of the hands raised. Oh, Dr. Craig, thank you. Your hand is up. I recognize you. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Sean. You know, I am really pleased that we're having this conversation, but again, Craig for the record. But from where I sit, I mean, we have a discussion this afternoon and we're talking about cybersecurity leadership in a pandemic, right?
Yes, yes.
And a lot of times I find that these conversations take place among us as IT practitioners, us as IT, you know, again, like you're preaching to the choir, where I'm
Yes.
not sure if there are any business leaders on this call. And I think part of what we have to do as IT practitioners who truly understand the issues and are raising the flags, where are we raising it? We have to find a way to reach out and get into the organizations and speak the language of the business leaders so that they take us seriously. And I think that is part of the problem that we are faced with moving forward, because we tend, most of us speak a different language to our leaders. And so as I think it was Arthur
Fid, yes.
When he was speaking, he spoke of the need for leadership to understand, but really and truly, how do we get them to understand? How do we get them to the table where we could have these kinds of conversations with them speaking their language? And I think that is one of the bigger dilemmas that we are faced with at this time.
And Dr. Craig, that's a great point, because we're in the middle of a pandemic and there's so much upsurge going on. I would want to think that leadership should be at the table. I could argue that they probably the networks have not been seriously compromised enough why they are not at the table, but I would hate to think that that's the reason. I'm going to defer to the next hand that I'm seeing here. Mr. Wooding, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you and your guests.
Yes.
Really good discussion. So I just wanted to weigh in on and build on a point that I believe Dr. Forrester was raising concerning cybersecurity strategy. And as she was speaking, it occurred to me that part of the issue that we have been contending with for some time now, as far as raising awareness within the C-level ranks and across the wider society concerning some of these cybersecurity issues, is that cybersecurity itself has an image problem, and the image is that it is a technical issue. The image is that it is camped inside of the black box that is corporate IT, and the reality is very different. The reality is that a good cybersecurity strategy is a good business strategy.
Yes.
And I think sometimes even in conversing about the subject, that reality is lost in translation. If we speak about some of these issues as just good business practice, you establish an office, you put a lock on the doors. You make sure, depending on your location, you have burglar proofing around certain key areas. You have security access to sensitive areas. Those are things that no one would really think twice about when determining how the layout of an office is going to go, or how the physical facilities of when it technical issues, because of that black box phenomenon, the reality is that it somehow becomes an optional, those IT folk asking for the sun, the star, and the moon's gold-plated solutions issue. And I think a lot of that has to do with the history of cybersecurity, which I think most on the call would know well of, in its glorified days of the hackers in the basements, punching away in dark rooms and breaking into systems. When the reality of modern cybersecurity is quite different. It is a sophisticated, structured, organized, and constant assault on businesses and data and networks. And it needs a similarly well-organized, funded, and operated approach by corporate leaders if those things have to be countered. So if we dispense with the cyber lingo and look at it as simply good business security and good business practice, then the conversation becomes a lot easier to be heard by those who may not have a technical background.
I think that's an excellent point, Bevel. Excellent point. As a matter of fact, what we are realizing that cybersecurity leadership does not necessarily have the same seat at the round table in influencing the kind of decisions by boards and so on. So that is actually a very important point. So you're saying the perception of where cybersecurity leadership is probably in part of the dogma that is affecting it. Why, you know, there's still this concern. I'm going to come back to that point. That's an extremely good point. I am noting it. Art, is your hand still up, or was it up from before?
It's a new hand.
It's a new hand. Oh boy, I tell you, in cyberspace, it's always possible to do that. Yes, I defer back to you, please.
Yeah, I agree with what Brother Bevel just said. And you know, if you were to go through your document and just remove cyber, it would immediately change the flavor of how things are dealt with. In fact, even in my courses, it's information security, which broadens the scope of the discussion. My job is to transform companies. So I have a responsibility to take a company, the one I'm with now, from a 75-year-old business model and transform it and make it profitable. And so every day that we come up with a new product or a new service idea, we've embedded in it changes that have to do with ensuring our most critical assets are secured. So the importance of a proper vendor analysis process way up front is a big important thing. Not many organizations recognize the importance of having a proper framework in place to select vendors, in particular your hosting partners, right? To ensure that they meet a number of the global compliance standards around how they protect your data that you're entrusting them to protect, right? Those things aren't near and dear to the hearts and soul of our typical business leader. Once you've done that, how often do you enforce ongoing security awareness programs? You know, every organization has an HR department, Sean, that is constantly running training. If you're a teller, how to do teller work. If you're in operations, how to do operational activities. If you're in finance, there are courses on finance.
That's right.
The idea is to also ingrain in that cultural normal, as Vivine mentioned, there should be these constant certification of every single staff. They're supposed to be doing these quick 10-minute courses. And there has to be an impact, for example, on your annual performance score if you don't take these. And if you score below certain numbers, right, it has to be forced on the staff. And I say this to lead to the point, there has been just for far too long, and it's because of where IT came from, where the senior leaders of our organizations view IT and anything sounding IT, right? To the point made earlier, I think Claire had mentioned it, as this thing that is there to keep the lights on, right? And so if the cybersecurity gets sort of thrown in that cohort, then it's just another keep the lights on thing. So I think it's important that the chief information officers are beginning to sort of change their own branding so people recognize them as the person sitting at the table, the person next in line, for example, be the CEO, so that it can be understood that if you're building out a store, if you're going to start an online channel, but you never had one before, if you're going to do be an online bank, that you must necessarily also understand what policies you're going to put in place. How are you going to rate? How are you going to measure? What are the new metrics? For example, Sean, there's a metric called your fish-prone score. How many of us are familiar with the concept? Fish-prone shows your staff's probability of being tricked by a phishing attack. And that's a powerful metric that organizations should have up there, just in the same way they have ROI, net income, right? CEOs are comfortable telling you about their net income and their net promoter score. We need to help get them in English, right, to understand what's my fish prone score this quarter versus same quarter last year. And
Yes.
that's the goal that I have as my mandate by my board, is
Yes.
to demystify information security so it becomes a critical success measurement criteria for the company.
I think that has to be one of our next podcast sessions in terms of that demystification and the awareness. I really take that point. It's a truly valid point. Now, colleagues, as we're on the call, and I always try and allow everybody an equal opportunity to speak. If persons want to ditto what they have to say until another raise point of a question, feel free to jump in at that point. To weigh in your concerns. As I see a lot more persons joining the session, I do think a few more persons are coming from the region. I would like to welcome them. I see Alvar, I see Otis, I see quite a few persons coming in. So thank you all for joining. So Dr. Craig, I see the hand up again. I acknowledge. Please, the floor is yours.
Sure, Claire again. And
yes.
I just responding to what Arthur was saying there, and I'm glad when you started this conversation, you spoke to being associated with the Arthur Lockjack School, Business School, as well as the Mona Business School.
Yes.
And I think that is critical, because here it is, I think we need to be training our future leaders to understand some of these things, because I listened to you speak, I listened to Dr. Forrester speak, and I'm hearing the perspective from the North American environment. But is that a reality for us in the Caribbean? Do our business leaders speak that language? Do our business leaders actually understand and recognize the importance of these things? And, and how do we get them to that point where, Beverly was saying some very interesting comments with respect to how we even brand the discussion. How do we taking away the cyber from the thing and talking to it about the importance of security. But we are still at that place where our business leaders are busy keeping the lights on, and and we have to get them to the stage to understand.
They are reactive. What you're saying, they're highly reactive, very reactive.
Right. And they have to get to the place where they understand that the things that are coming out of this pandemic that existed a long time ago, the pandemic is just highlighting it, that they need to stop and pay attention to it and have this including as part of their strategy as well.
Yes, I have some comments about that after, because as the questions keep going along. So I take the argument that, culture sometimes seems to be having strategy for breakfast. I took that term from a colleague some time ago, and it clearly is manifesting itself in the space of security and how it is treated by brands. So I endorse all of what has been said and recognize the fact that the definitions, whatever they are, it still comes down to the fact that the leadership within the organization have to be paying kind attention. Yes, Bevel, observe you again going forward. Yes.
Thank you. Just want to again build on that, because it is easy to say that leadership is missing the ball, asleep at the wheel, not necessarily giving these issues the attention they deserve. But when you peer behind that symptom, it exposes a deeper problem, a deeper disease, and that is ignorance, born out of the fact that for most leaders within organizations, institutions, both within the private and public sector in the Caribbean, data is not available to create any meaningful sense of dread or any meaningful sense of priority concerning some of these matters. And if you consider the reality that for most territories within the Caribbean, there are no disclosure requirements for cyber incidents or cyber attacks. The unintended consequence of that is cybersecurity and cybersecurity related matters seem to be someone else's problem in some other distant jurisdiction or clime. and until the data conundrum is wrestled with and reconciled, the sense of the importance and priority of cybersecurity issues, unfortunately, might remain or may remain something that will always be lower down the leadership priority totem pole than it ought to be. As several of you know, I am responsible for the Caribbean Network Operators Group. I work with the Eastern Caribbean OECS Commission to raise awareness and sensitivity to some of these technology-related issues amongst the ranks of government.
Yes.
And it is one of the recurring themes of those interactions is just how difficult it is to truly understand what the technical community is trying to state and why it should matter within the context of all of the other priorities that are being weighed in what are essentially resource-constrained environments. Now, we can argue that there is no digital economy, there is no digital enterprise without attention to some of these details. But the truth of the matter is somewhat different. There is. You can set up an online shop, you can engage in digital transactions without paying attention to the security issues. But that famous statement about it's not a matter of if you're going to get hacked, it's a matter of when, seems to be the only jarring, attention-grabbing.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes.
That has the kind of attention in technology. And I just wanted to throw out for our consideration that the issue of providing Caribbean leaders with relevant local and regional data concerning the state of the Caribbean's digital economies, the state of the Caribbean's vulnerability to digital attack or digital corruption, those things have to be quantified for it to receive the same kind of attention as other pressing matters, such as financing and investing in X versus Y, where it is easier and more tangible to make the association between investment and return. And so we have to also factor that into the discussion in terms of how we present the kinds of information that will captivate the attention of leadership,
Yes.
so that it can become part of the decision-making matrix.
So extremely profound point there, an extremely profound point that Mr. Beverwooden has raised. And, you know, in hindsight, in looking at the conversation that we're having and how it impacts the Caribbean, we could be saying that we're playing lip service or probably a little bit foolhardy, that the responses to some of these questions will be clear-cut without the data provided. But I take the point. It's a very, very important point. So I'm going to come back to it a little bit later in the conversation, because they will hit the nail on the head. Something serious has to happen in order for the kind of reactions to be unearthed as it relates to a cyber crisis. But you know, I'm going to put this to the team here, and the questions are on the deck. Please feel free to weigh in as we go along. So I'm moving to the next question, because we have done a good job exhausting the definitions. Since the pandemic, the world seems to be in a hostage crisis, and I use my words very carefully and clearly. Hostage, and it's a strong word. Hostage crisis as it relates to these cyber attacks. You know, can you account for what is happening here, and how wide the impact of this is? I mean, what is really going on? Why we are seeing this actual increase? Just on the last weekend here, probably two days ago or a night ago, I mean, I was listening to BBC, 200 more attacks, if my memory serves me correct on that. And there are several other attacks going on all over the place. So what is accounting for this? Is it that somebody is just having a field day, or it's orchestrated? Just to get a viewpoint. The floor is open, and I see Art's hand being placed up. Yes, Art, go ahead.
I just think that it's the new world that we're working in, right?
Really?
You know, look, Sean,
Yes.
I sent you something privately by mail a couple of days ago about an
Yes.
attack that I had, where someone just got caught by a well-disguised phishing attack and clicked on it, and it didn't do anything for a while. But what the perpetrators did was they essentially wrote a rule into this employee's Outlook profile. And what that rule said, guys, was whenever an email is sent by this employee out, take a look and search for words like finance, money, and anything that seems to imply a dollar amount, and route that to an email address XXXYYY something something something. And that's it. So then you'd say, well, they're not really locking files or anything, but what they're doing really is they're essentially gathering all that information that they're going to use on the dark web, or they might turn around and use that for malicious reasons, right? The reason this is happening is it's the new world. Look, years ago, right, before all of us were born, and Jesse James and his boys were running around, they were robbing banks. Why were they robbing banks? They said, because that's where the money was, right?
Yes,
And it's the same paradigm. They're going after us because essentially the business models have now become omni-channel. Banks are omni-channel. The last bank that I led, we were an omni-channel bank. Reeds is an omni-channel business. So is everybody else now. And all we're doing now is giving them an option that says, look, the money is online and I don't have to physically go anywhere to get at that money or that nugget, which is information. So Jesse James robbed banks because the money was there. These guys are going after us in the cyberspace because the data is there. And that's really what's happening. So this is why it's important, again, that we, and it's a collective we, from educators to consultants and others, that we begin to educate in every way we can, guys, our decision makers, so they understand, again, that this is the reality we're in. We don't have to like it, but this is the world we're doing business in. And if you choose to do business in this world, and it's hard not to, because I'm not sure what else you're going to do, then you're going to have to necessarily deal with this new dimension.
Yes.
Of what it means to run a company and run an organization and hire people and write job descriptions and write policies and hold people accountable when they don't do what they're supposed to do. It's literally that.
Very interesting perspective. So you're saying, and I like the cowboy's analogy, I will not forget it, because I'm a visual learner. You're saying when you make that comparison, pretty much what we're seeing is just a part of a new normal of what can be happening. It's just that the pandemic has sort of put a bit more focus on it because a lot more of us have had to be moving online. I think that's a way to interpret what you have said. This is not something necessarily as strange as some of us might be thinking it is in John Public, because you've been going online since last March 2020 and a lot more, but the attacks that we have been seeing does not necessarily equate to the fact that you are probably being hacked more. It's just a result of the omni-channels, as you put it, the omni-channels of the data. That's a very interesting perspective, and I really appreciate Art's comment on this. Is this the view of you all colleagues? Is this a view you share? Because Art makes a very good point there, very, very good point. Is this a similar view that you share that he has in regards to this matter?
I'll jump in here, Sean, and I say,
Yes.
to one extent, yes. But I do believe with remote work, then we have many more businesses who have turned to Internet of Things and devices that a lot of people would not have been using in the past. And many of these companies have not put in any zero trust setup in their system.
Yes.
Many of these devices are not being managed or monitored to a great extent. And so bad actors, as you define them in your opening term, have seen leeways and openings and areas in which you can tap into an individual employee to gain access to a company. And I believe along that line, we are also seeing a lot more of attacks because there's more openings and more opportunities for people to get into the system through a back door or in other ways.
And to elucidate the point, what you're saying, some of these attacks could be unintentional versus intentional. Even the same persons who are using the services online, working from home and otherwise, might themselves just not being aware. And I think Art made the point well, just not being aware, don't know how to adjust and pivot to these circumstances, so they naturally become victims. I think this is one of the big issues in Jamaica right now with the small and medium-sized business sectors. There's a whole conversation going on around cybersecurity awareness for small and medium-sized businesses as compared to the larger companies that probably have a little bit more resources to put that infrastructure in place. So these are very good points that you're raising, and I do take note of what you have both said in this regard. Very constructive. So colleagues, is it that you have ditto to what Dr. Forrester and what Mr. Feder said, or are there others on the call here who have any other variations in thought behind how this is happening and the kind of impact that you are seeing, just even at a high level? Probably not enough to significantly shake the boots of some leadership to say, listen, I'm going to get my act together because I don't want my environment and my staff accounts to be compromised. But let me hear any other weighing points on this. Is this as we see it, or is it just as all Dr. Forrester and Mr. Fitt has put it? If it is, yes.
So Carmina here.
Carmina, how are you? Thank you.
I am doing great, thanks. So I am in agreement with both points. I just wondering, and I can't help but also think that also in a time of pandemic, during the lockdown period and so forth, and we have a saying in Jamaica, the devil find work for idle
For
hands.
idle hands, yes.
And persons would have probably been getting laid off, depending on the job industry that they're in, and finding different ways to earn money could have also been a motive. I'm not sure. Well, I'm not speaking factual, but I can't help but think that that is a possible contributor to all of this,
Yes.
because you realize that companies that are also, getting hacked or under ransomware attack are established companies who had an online presence before,
Yes.
always there. They are technology companies, a lot of them. And, they're not necessarily doing anything different, but they're now being targeted,
Correct.
So
Excellent point. Excellent point. So the devil is finding tasks for idle hands. But I want to jump in at that point based on what Carmina is saying. I am seeing, and I'm stirring up the pot here in this podcast conversation that we're having. Welcome to Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership on a Sunday afternoon, July 4. Is it when I see entities like Colonial Pipeline, a gas and power line, gas line company, being fully compromised, and I'm going to defer to Dr. Campbell in a moment, fully compromised, services taken offline, you disrupt the petrol sector in that context. Then you have the situation of electricity grids in some places being compromised. Then you have more of the same with happening, I realized, in Europe the other day. Then you have stores and general businesses going offline. It almost feel like we in the middle of a storm. And in Jamaica today there was a storm that just finished blow over. You feel like you're almost in the middle of a storm, which has this push factor being perpetrated by individuals who have agenda. I saw with the case of Colonial Pipeline, they paid a ransom. They paid a ransomware. They paid for the ransomware, which I thought was foolhardy. And it behooves me to think that we here in the Caribbean, as much as I heard Art and Vivian indicate that, well, hey, You know, these are some new trends and norms, but it behooves me to think that the impact for us in this region would be significant, in that I can't imagine for a moment, or I can, if the local petroleum companies like Petrojam in Jamaica, and I can think about the ones in Trinidad and all across the other region, if they had an attack on these small island states, we would be literally, probably I couldn't even be keeping this call, because the entire power system would be down, and then the impact would be far-reaching. Almost reminds me of the 1988 Hurricane Gilbert that we had in Jamaica when I was walking around back then. It behooves me to think that the impact can be so great, and leadership in organizations can't see that. Is it because I'm in tech why I'm saying that? But
No,
it brings a question, and that's why I'm putting it back on. It brings a question. Yeah, yes, Art. Yeah.
On Wednesday, the 21st of October, 2020, Tatil, Tatil, an extremely, humongously large insurance player in Trinidad, right, was hit by a massive ransomware. The biggest conglomerate, Ansa McCall, was victim of ransomware hackers.
Yes.
And it held the company hostage. All right. The country's, the Trinidad's, all right, biggest insurer, has been effectively stalled, was back then, for about 2 weeks, 2 full weeks, without being able to process a claim, sell a new policy. You bet it's affecting. You bet it will take you down. You bet it will destroy your brand. And it's here in our region, and it happened.
Yes.
And it's on the internet.
And the leadership did not, okay, I'm not going to use them as a labeling point, but that should have been a point of reference for leadership in any and every other organization, even if they are cyber or not, to recognize that the issues here are real. So it's a very important point you have raised, because the impact is significant. The impact is very significant. And I would hate to think that management is not paying attention to that, or management has some level of incompetency why they are not able to move this thing forward. I'm still throwing it out there, but it's some good points you guys raising, very good points. I'm going to take Dr. Campbell's comment now. I see the hand up, and I really appreciate how this conversation is going. Sir Campbell, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I ditto all the excellent points raised. I just wanted to add that the CIO, being my pet peeve now, being that individual who seemed to be benefiting a lot from the pandemic, in terms of raising his or her stake in terms of ascension to the position of possible CEO of the organization, or the new organization as we view it, with all the disruptions taking place, is now being given a new challenge. And that challenge is the challenge of cybersecurity, the risk involved with the digitization of the organization. And I see it as a potential pitfall for the CIO, who must think carefully of how they're going to educate the people in the organization, how they're going to get them trained, get them alert to take cybersecurity issues as very important, as very critical to the survival of the organization. And that's
excellent point, Dr. Campbell. And Art, you know, on the heels of that, is looking to respond, as I defer to him as well. Excellent points. Yes, Sir Phil, go ahead.
Look, I appreciate what Dr. Campbell said, because as a CIO who has spent my 35 years transforming organizations,
boy, it's not an easy job.
It isn't as much a pitfall, brother, as much as it's a necessary accountability that carry if you're a chief information officer. And so So in the restructuring of your organization, which essentially is a part of a cyber strategy. I was speaking with a colleague about an hour ago, who happens to be on the panel, by the way,
Yes.
about what does it mean to transform the organization to
Yes.
protect yourself. And it means there's a role for HR.
There is a role for HR.
Look at the job descriptions, right? The IT manager is not the CIO, and the
Yes,
information security officer is not the CIO. They will
that's
report to
correct.
the CIO. So I think my point is that it is the awareness again of the organizations to
Yes,
understand this is not a discussion about switches and routers,
routers. It's awareness.
because again, we're not picking on the brothers and sisters at Tatil. But
Yes,
they have switches, routers, and firewalls, and they have IT managers, and they have CEOs, and they have network engineers, and this happened. And the inability to react tells you that this isn't about the technology.
humans are the
Absolutely.
weakest link.
Absolutely. And the policies and the frameworks
Framework.
that will help you react faster when it happens, because it's going to happen, right? So it's what you do once it's happened that's also critical.
The point Art is making, and I get it again, is that even the HR, using the HR example, HR themselves might not even know how to address the issue of the skill set changes that need to be made to reflect what obtains. I could even argue the CIO, who should be the most knowledgeable in this case, and it's not every CIO will be like Art, who understands the breadth of issues, because I've met CIOs who said, listen, they got jobs and they got a 30% indemnity allowance that in the event of a security breach, they can spend. I mean, they put that as a request in their contract, and they didn't survive 2 contracts because the breach didn't occur once in the same year, it occurred 2 times. So they have to pack their bags and go, which again, might be the case that those persons themselves in terms of the upskilling and the retooling. So I will agree with Art. The whole thing is feeling like a full awareness sensitization. And probably before we end the call, it is to make a mandate or to move an agenda or to make a position that, you know, we need an interesting awareness type initiative with the need to drive frameworks. Probably from research we'll do that, but I'll come to it again, because it is really a fundamental point he has raised. But the impact is great. I put it to you, in Jamaica, I would not want the colonial pipeline attack to hit the country, to the point that I have actually at the university starting to model experiments to look at how, if there was a failure on those gas networks, how we could measurably isolate the failures and still have the networks running. And it's not a far-fetched thing to be doing, including what we call SCADA networks. And on the power lines, how you isolate them in an electrical network. These are some fundamental things based on the impact that troubles me. But I take what the team is saying here this evening, that it will vary from place to place and the level of awareness and response. But the impact is great. And I still don't know yet how we're going to respond to when those things do happen. That's another question coming. But this has been a very interesting conversation we're having on a Sunday afternoon here. Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership 101. It's Sunday, July 4. So in the context then of what Dr. Campbell had said and what Art had responded to, the impact is a silver bullet question which will vary. So if I move forward and I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, the question, how then do organizations and governments, and I probably won't want to say government in particular, but how do organizations and governments effectively combat these cyber attacks as they occur? Because if I take it to a national level now, it is happening. I appreciate the awareness issues that Art and everybody else is putting forward. But the devil is in the details. The incidences are happening. What then is the response of the organizations and the government? More so if it is happening at scale, even in one country. And we see what's happening outside of the Caribbean, but don't don't be foolhardy that the spots of attacks that are hitting other smaller countries in the island could not happen at a larger scale that compromises us all. But what is it that we think we should be doing to combat this? And I hear the awareness, it's important. But as we build aware, what are some of the other things you think that could be happening in addition to the awareness campaigns for organizations and governments to effectively deal with these issues? The floor is open, but I see comments going in the chat. So the floor is open. Anybody can take the mic. Yes.
I mean, along with awareness, we cannot ignore the technical piece of it. It comes down to how are we protecting the network's use of the firewalls? How are we authenticating our users, making sure that anyone who is remotely accessing the network must be having dual or multiple factor authentication. So others put in there, we have our penetration testing. So I think it is very important for companies at this point in time to be executing or going through a security audit, seeing where you are as a company, where we are as a company, where we are as a country. Having an expert come in and really do a complete security audit, and then implement steps from there. And this is going to take into consideration protecting the network, protecting the data, protecting all the applications that we're using content filter and those things. So I mean, you can't have a security discussion without talking about confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Availability, of course, yes.
At the top of our minds, and looking at ways to make sure that all these areas are protected at all times. So I think it would start for us with an audit.
It will start with an audit. So, okay, so it's a very useful set of contributor points. So I'll take it. The security.
Sean, if I could just jump in.
Sure, Claire.
Just following on from Dr. Forrester. While yes, an audit is a good place to start, but I think we also need to budget for these things. So, if we don't recognize that we need to spend money and that we not just be, yes, there may be some free tools out there, but at the end of the day, putting in some of these programs is going to cost the organization something. And we need to recognize that these things need to be budgeted for the same way you budget for other things in the organization.
Yes. These are some very important points we're raising, and I'm going to now follow up on yours to bring something to the table. Let me give you the use case now. So the question of how do organizations and government effectively combat the attacks could be a post-incident. So that's after the fact. It happened and you need to mitigate. When I think about Colonial Pipeline, I am wondering why they paid the ransom if their actual network, if it was a single point of failure. Although there are other things to support, that is one way of trying to catch the bad actors. But when you think about it deeply, here in the Caribbean, where they say that the security networks are like ghetto networks, I'll put that in quote. I was traveling abroad some years ago, and I was at a forum, and somebody likened our networks to that of same. And I did not want to repeat it, but it left up a profound impact on me. In that, what was being suggested is that we were very short of the resources to provide the required critical infrastructure protection, to the point that if these networks in the Caribbean were compromised, it could mean that the ability to restore from a network failure might be hard, because the network that was set up and running did not have certain practices. They did not practice certain levels of high availability. They did not have redundancy. So what obtains is that when you had a single point of failure, literally the entire business shut down. Exactly. And then what it now means is that is either struggling to figure out how to pay the ransom, or you're out of business, which I could argue, colleagues, is the actual situation in the region where security was never a part of the initial mindset. If any of these, it's like you have a Tanti Tanty-town shock. And if any rain fall too hard and blow that thing down, you know, or wind blow it, it's gone. So our networks are in that zero trust mode as we suggested. And now I'm asking myself, and I'm asking all of us, because we are either in the diaspora and the region, but we're all the region together. If this reaches us, government and organizations alike, use the term in Jamaican and Caribbean term, dog nyama wasapa. Because what it means is that you literally could be out of business. Your environment is completely washed. And I would hate to think that leadership is waiting to see that complete degradation. And again, that's for another day of conversation. The same question I just asked you is the same thing I'm asking for the other, but with one difference. What you do after the fact, and then what you do as a pre-planning step. So what you do post-incident and what you do pre-incident. How do organizations and government effectively become, avoid becoming the next victim of these attacks? So it's a two-pronged thing. How you deal with the attack after it occurs, a hurricane occurs, a storm, you have to wipe up the water, etc. And then you say, next time, I'm going to ensure that this does not get to me. And I did not include Dr. Clare's point that money is a major part of that equation. I'm going to come back to it. Or is it the mindset that is wrong still? That how it deals with the prior and the post. These are things. Universities are in this situation. Small, medium-sized business, big businesses locally, including big tech in this region, who have not made that investment. Such that I don't know if the two questions, either way it happens for them, they will still be caught into the net. I don't know if my points are resonating, but I see 8 points in the chat. I mean, a lot of points. Great. We have policies of sorts in the region. Yes, we have compliance is key to the post. Yes, and the enforcement. Yes, compliance is key. I agree with you. And all of that is not necessarily happening in a timely way. But it still feel like a moot point that if we do face the compromises, petroleum, I'm just thinking about the major utilities, electricity, etc. If those got compromised, is there a comeback in quick turnaround? And is it that we're waiting on that to happen? And I don't want to use this podcast, like we would say in the Caribbean, setting goat mouth on something. But the argument is, it is a real one. Is it that we're waiting on becoming the next victim to basically respond to how we treat with these, to do the security audits and the pen tests and the various risk analysis? And is it that now we should be doing that investment at scale? Is it government that should be spending the type of effort and time? Should it be the small or medium-sized companies coming together to do it through their organizations? Should it be the universities and the academia across the region coming together to factor these conversations? I'm throwing it out in the context that having a solution to these problems needs some strategic owners. It will probably need some strategic owners. I might need one or more person to be the owner. But I defer again if there's any other view on this. I defer to you if there are any other views on this. This is Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership on a Sunday afternoon. Very riveting conversation we're having here in this important matter. I acknowledge Dr. Campbell and I acknowledge again Art Fit in this conversation. Yes, Dr. Campbell, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm going back to the point that Art made about people being the centerpiece of this failure. And if we are talking about people, then we have to talk about HR.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So how does the HR function in today's environment, in today's organization? Are they equipped? Are they trained to? Because I see three main functions of HR: the recruitment and those strategies around recruitment, ensuring that They see the organization for the next 3 years, what kind of talents the organization will need to support their development, their strategic goals. I see retention in terms of how do they compete with other organizations, similar or allied organizations that are competing with them. And I see retirement in terms of people over the years have built up so much knowledge assets in the organization. What do they do with all of this, and how do they use that as a feedback loop into the organization? I don't see many or any organization yet in my lifetime so far in Jamaica, certainly, that have really honed this this portfolio appropriately so that they drive the human asset in organization. And I think that's front and center of any strategy. We're going to need a new type of, a new, a new, if I could say, a new creature, who we call the CHRO.
Yes.
That have vision, that have depth, that can create partnership with all the different stakeholders within the organization, especially the CIO, to identify the skill sets that we need, that can read and forecast the kind of skills that are emerging, that can reach back into universities and see what kind of skills they need to develop and train, the kind of certification that is going to be required to keep the organization humming along. So HR for me has to be the centerpiece.
Why, Dr. Campbell? I mean, I'm smiling because, you know, at UWI, at LotJack, we've rewritten our HR curriculum to produce directors and leaders of HR who are transformational leaders, as opposed to the ones you were referring to, which are what we call traditional or transactional, right? You need a form, you need a letter. This is why we do that. The transformational HR is actually sitting at the table with all the other C-suite guys and gals, and they're saying, hey, look, what are the processes that are now going to have to be necessarily reviewed because of this new cyber world that we do business in, right? HR struggles with what traditional IT struggles with. You keep the lights on, you're an afterthought. And so at the university, we are doing our part already at UE to redefine the HR program. In fact, I think one of my students is on right now. I just saw her pop on. But that's so critical and so key because HR people, right, Dr. Campbell, they're going out and they're recruiting a CIO and they don't know what to look for.
And that's true.
They hire an IT manager, spent the last year supporting the network, and make them the CIO. And then the CEO says, when he talks to me, I feel like Charlie Brown.
Right.
So you're right. There's a huge HR component to it.
Wow. And
so that's why I said it's a look, there are three sides to the strategy: people, process, technology. And it takes you back where we started, Sean.
Yes.
Tech has resolved itself.
People and the process. Yes.
Every company that's been hacked, if you go and look at the amount of money spent with Cisco, Fortinet, F5, Big IP, I can go down the list.
Yes.
Millions of dollars, and they still get hacked.
They still get hacked.
And when you look at how they got hacked, it comes in some simple buckets. People didn't know that they were being hacked. There was no monitoring. Once they were hacked, they didn't know what to do, who to call, how to react, meaning processes, right?
Right, so people and process, yes.
You're gonna constantly come back. And even if you say policies, public policies, government policies, that's just part of the big process box, right? And at the end of the day, today, for example, I will never onboard a new vendor without my information security guy sending him through our security assessment, which is a service provided by a company called Know Before.
Yes, I know about Know Before.
If they don't pass that, it doesn't matter if they have the best functional fit for the business need. That's it. We can't sign a contract because we're enforcing our policies, if you see where I'm going.
I see where you're going.
And we're not waiting for the government to tell us either, because the government will create the environment of policies and public protocols. At the end of the day, I still have to support the needs of my investors. And my investors are saying, hey, Art, if the hosting vendor doesn't have a SOC 2 report done by an independent auditor, we can't do business with them. So that's the process piece that we have to work towards, while government's going to do its thing, but private sector must become accountable to the changes it must adopt.
Yes, yes. So they should be spending some time as a part of that process. So government, this is an excellent point. The two questions actually have, overlaying concerns. So albeit a post-incident response, or you're doing proactive monitoring to have pre-incident response, people and process are not merely the technology, is the underlying issue. That's what I'm getting from out of it, which is a very salient point. And I also recognize at this point, Dr. Campbell, you wanted to weigh in again on this, Dr. Campbell?
No, I should take on my hand.
Yes, and equally, the awareness element for HR, I almost feel like at the end of this session, I need to go and set up a training program for HR. And I don't know if I'm the only one feeling guilty that HR needs to go through this process, but it might be a whole scale regional thing, because HR is not necessarily, they do the training for us normally in organizations, and I did not put small and medium-sized business, but medium to larger business, HR do the training, but do they themselves get trained in the way that they should be responding to what you have said, Dr. Campbell, and how Art has also put it? It's a fundamental point. I have to probably talk to HR in the morning, I will, and ask about a training program for them as it relates to this information security space and how they need to be treating with it. That's for a potential.
I definitely think so. There are tons and tons of resources out there in terms of research that show that if an organization really is going to achieve superior return on its investment from the alignment of business and IT strategies, it can only do so through its people. No matter what kind of technology that you have, it can be replicated. The processes can be replicated. However, people, it's unique things that people will do that will create those unique, distinct competencies that gives the organization that distinctive competence that can be translated into competitive advantage. And so the HR people has to be a part of it, because we have to look at people as being that critical asset. Yes.
I'm going to throw to Carib now that we probably should have an HR information security forum at some point. If we could get, I'm willing to spearhead to assist that, because it is a way of starting to look at how we're going to get the region into awareness campaigns and programs, consistent with how Art had described the position in this matter. So I'm fully on board with that argument. And I think those two questions are now mute, because cyber attacks post-incident or pre-incident without the people and the process, the technology is already a foregone conclusion. Technology cannot solve the problem by itself.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yeah, so I take that, yes, go ahead, please.
I'm adding just a little point to this, because in your initial question, you asked who should be responsible.
Yes.
And obviously, as you have seen it through the discussion, it cannot be just one person.
Yes.
As Arthur had mentioned, it's a multidimensional problem which needs a multidimensional solution. And initially, I'd said it needs to be a holistic approach to solving the problem. So, for instance, recently, many of the independent schools here, and I don't know if in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, for instance, if we're using cyber security policies, insurance policies. But that was one way of enforcing the requirements for deeper cybersecurity strategies within the schools. So we all
Yes.
have to go through significant reviews and implementations of processes just so that we could have our cyber insurance policy renewed. And so again, it just shows that even though an organization should be holding itself responsible, but there are other policies from a public level or from the government level that the region can institute so that individual companies are actually being compliant.
But as you mentioned, cyber insurance policies and as a form of how you mitigate against these attacks. Here in Jamaica, I think there are 2 entities that have decided to take up cyber insurance. So if your company is compromised, some of these digital assets can be restored through cyber insurance, but it's not clear cut because it's not a foolproof solution that every time you get an attack and compromise, cyber insurance is really working. I wonder if you guys in the rest of the Caribbean region have any of that. I'm curious, actually. Yes.
I mean,
So,
we know that insurance companies don't like paying out claims, right?
that's right.
Okay. So the idea is, you know, the cyber insurance is now a necessary requirement for this new way of doing business, right?
Yes.
And I would suggest that if we're going to buy stocks in a company,
Yes.
we ought to look at their cyber insurance policy if they even
Yes.
have one. And you shouldn't invest if they don't, because that's telling you if this is the future, if this is where we're all going. And of course, this is where we're going. It's not even a question, right, Sean?
Yes.
How is it that you would have, let's say, fire insurance for your brick and mortars, but now in an omni-channel world, you don't have a cyber insurance policy? I mean, it's contradicting. And so it's you know, what Vivian said is so important. And Vivian, yeah, I remember you and I were talking about this recently. And some of the things they're forcing the companies to do that they probably wouldn't have done. For example, thou shalt have multi-factor authentication, else premium is going up $80,000 a year, period. Yes. Now you bet that's going to get some CEOs attention. May not like it, you know, Sean.
Yes.
Will cost from now to next year. But guess what? You have to have that insurance if you want to have people invest in your company or even do business with you going forward. So from a public policy standpoint, government, I say those things need to be put in place as well. Totally agree.
But you know, just listening to you again, and an awareness campaign around cyber insurance,
yes,
is a major issue for this region. Here in Jamaica, I have actually sat with insurance companies asking that question, and they say no. It is just recently, I understand, I'm talking since 2020, in particular, that there are some two insurance companies. One of them is Grace Kennedy through their GK Insurance, looking at that now with some minor coverage of cyber insurance, but it does not protect a company against a major breach or attack. I feel it most for the small and medium-sized businesses, because right now many of the, and even in the other groups that we have here in Jamaica, we've been talking to them, and I'm almost sure this has to be for the region. The small and medium-sized sectors are worried stiff that if their little businesses get compromised due to cyber attack, they have no fallback on. More so considering it was already hard for them when they went into business to even get the loans that they would have wanted, albeit from a bank or private equity investor, to start the business. Now security becoming a compound layer to that for the private equity investor to give them money for security of the digital security of the environment, because neither financial house, traditional bank, or none of the insurance houses are in the business of cyber security insurance. So that I'm putting the buckets away of the things that need to be done, and to actually start the conversations locally. I would ask probably through Bevel and Clear that we have this as a regional conversation with some of the stakeholders to even start the awareness campaign. But this is carrying technology thought leadership, and there's so much to uncover and unearth that it is why we call it that, thought leadership. So a newly hired a CEO, I agree. And Bevel, there, there you go. You have a practical, mandatory policy changing behavior. Yes. So, the insurance teams need to be cyber certified. That is so true. So the main takeaway from these arguments so far is leadership, cyber leadership, and in terms of the people and the process, is a collection of teams that need to be retooled and retrained. But then who takes responsibility for retooling and retraining these persons as a collective body?
Sean, let me share a recent example of a conversation we have had with an HR practitioner in the Eastern Caribbean.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about the discussion was the HR manager was aware that having appropriately certified, trained staff would have made a difference to the organization. Of course, the person didn't know exactly what kind of training, what kind of skill set, and they wanted to have some indication of how to go about, one, setting the structures and standards for that. But two, they were having a discussion similar to the one we were having, which is how to get other HR colleagues to move from being HR managers to being strategic human resource development leaders.
Yes.
And I think the distinction is very important for us to make here, because not all HR departments do strategic human resource development work.
That is true. That is true.
And what we are discussing requires strategic HR development, because you're not only looking for the skill sets to get into the organization today, you're looking for that ongoing resource development to keep the institution secure tomorrow. And all of the discussions around the C-suite conversations, the requirement for budgets, the need to have some other kind of burning bridge or some other kind of catalyst or incentive to drive the decision making was exactly what that person was also wrestling with from an HR context.
Well, wrestling is right. Wrestling is right.
So it does require multi-sector conversation. Caribnog is willing. I hear you loud and clear. If you want to
Yes.
have a post discussion about how we could collaborate.
Indeed.
I am certain that our colleagues on the HR side will also be quite pleased to engage in this conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in Jamaica, there's the Human Resource Association of Jamaica. As a past Jamaica Computer Society president, I actually had been engaging with them on several fronts. I don't know if there's a Caribbean human resource organization in that context. It might require a little research after this session to gather that data. So we do have a little bit of data gathering there, but it will be useful to have them at the same table and to have other Caribbean players in the HR community. Let us come together and actually have this conversation. So you're right. So the solution to the problem, we are sort of discerning what it is. The leadership that needs to come to the table is ourselves over in tech, those in the other areas of the organization who are not tech. We come at the same table and agree on the things that we will need to change to pivot in this new digital world, and to start doing in small bite sizes the training and the strategic planning, particularly, that will be required to push this conversation. So I really think this is a useful discussion we're having here on a Sunday afternoon, July 4th. Hopefully we can free up ourselves of this mindset of how we should be treating with cybersecurity and its strategic direction. Okay, so I think we have emphasized the point. So then allows us to move on, but let me make sure that there are no questions that I have missed here. Excellent point, Bevel. Okay. Just want to make sure I captured everybody's views. Thank you, Bevel. You have to jump. Yes, yes. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it, man. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon down there in the Twin Island. So this is an important set of conversations that we are having, and it somewhat, means as well for small and medium-sized businesses in particular, who don't necessarily have the resources and the resource support like the larger entities do. They, in a big way, will need this because they don't necessarily have any big HR. They don't, if they're putting themselves into online digital businesses, they didn't invest in any high-end large IT infrastructure. It's an on-demand provision that they do. So when I think about small and medium-sized business, that the kind of awareness programs that we'll have to put in place for them is also significant. And a potential information security framework around how you protect the small and medium-sized businesses as a part of the hub to this conversation is extremely important. Okay, so Dr. Craig, you have to jump as well. All right, thank you so much as well for coming. Thank you so much. Keep safe. Thank you so much. And we will be following up with the team from Carib now as to some of the action steps that we can put forward in this conversation. So it's really Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership on a Sunday afternoon, July 4. So we have blown the conversation out of the water, colleagues, because what you have said, listen, man, this have nothing much to do with the technology. It's about the people and the processes. So for the remainder of the questions that are raised here, I think the concern now that has to be put on the table is how we treat with the people and the process issues. And the next question that we have here, in terms of I'll move the argument away from the indictment of the cybersecurity leadership, because we're all embracing that we have to own the problem. I think that's the takeaway too, we are owning collectively the problem. It can't be an indictment. So small island states in the Caribbean with less critical infrastructure protection, which is a technology reality, that is a technology reality, will need a short-term, medium, and a long-term strategy to deal with this cyber attack dilemma that we are seeing, or may not be seen as a dilemma. What are your recommendations then as to how we approach the short term, the medium term, and the long term? And particularly if I take Art's view and Dr. Campbell's view about HR and people and processes, how for those of us who are here on the session this afternoon, how would you categorize the short-term approach, the medium-term approach, and a long-term approach to a solution?
So Sean,
Floor
I
is
think
open.
that's an interesting question, and I think we need to kind of unwrap this.
Yes, definitely.
But we have to unwrap this, colleagues, within the context of the world in which we do business, right?
Yes.
So if Dr. Campbell and I decide that we're going to start a new bank, right? Having gotten the government's approval to run a bank, we're not probably going to go look for a building at the corner of First and Main Street. What we're going to do is we're going to do everything as a service.
Yes.
We're going to subscribe to a cloud bank as a service.
Yes.
We're going to subscribe to our HR as a service, and there are lots of those. We could use, Paycom, which is sitting there in the cloud for everybody to use, right? We're going to subscribe to recruitment as a service, right? We're going to subscribe to business intelligence as a service.
Oh boy,
right?
Yeah.
We're going to subscribe to a supply chain as a service, because at the end of the day, the point I'm making is You don't got to own anything anymore
Yes.
to feel like you have a business, right? You got the egos. See, the beautiful thing about what's happening, you know, guys, is your ego gets snapped right away. Because if you're
Yes.
driven by the number of floors and the
Yes.
number of machines that are lit up in your computer room, that's history.
Yes.
So,
That's
so
history.
if we say that's the context, then for you to come to your question, then whether you're small, medium, or large, it's now a level playing field. Because
Yes.
what you're doing is
Yes.
you
Yes.
are now shifting the risk to the service provider with the understanding that email is not your own little email server in your basement. It's Microsoft Cloud Email. And with that comes certain expectations around security, transparency, support, maintenance, reaction, failover, availability. And if you take everything I just said, then the people doing your call center, which is another cloud service, you're
Yes.
expecting the same. And if you carry that across, whether you're two guys on a truck, a patty shop, or NCB, right?
Mhm.
It's the same discussion.
Same discussion. So small size is no longer a factor
No,
in this
because it's a
conversation.
service. It's a
Yeah,
service
a service.
architecture world that we're living
That's correct.
in. It's a great leveler. Any
Yes.
day now, e-commerce transactions, which is huge, by the way, in Jamaica. It's just that we're using someone's website outside of Jamaica, but e-commerce within the Jamaican context, meaning a Jamaican e-commerce service provider, is going to explode. But the servers that are running this thing are sitting in Azure, in
Yes.
Microsoft's cloud, in Amazon's cloud, or they're
Yes.
sitting in Chris Records' cloud at T-Tech. Right?
T-Tech.
So I am going to now be Mrs. Johnson's bake shop is going to be as secured as T-Tech's secured, if you see where I'm coming from.
Yes.
As Azure is secured, if you see where
Yes.
I'm going. And guess
Yes.
what? Mr. Johnson, who runs NCB, has the same expectation.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a great. So essentially, by moving to thing as a service or a services oriented world, which we're there already, we don't have to like it, but that's where we are. You find that we each can now have the same level of security and protection as the guy who's worth 200 billion and I'm only worth 40,000 bucks.
Yes. Yes. So in unpacking this conversation, what the realization then is, if you have decimated the question again, it is level, the short, the medium, and the long-term strategy is going to almost be on parity for all players because they are all using as a service provisions, albeit in the cloud or in the fog these days, to do this. But then it begs the question that if, based on what you have just said, is so, the service provider who has the remit to ensure that if the client users, because in this case, the small, medium-sized business and every other entity might be seen as a client for those services. Yes. What it then means is that the service provider has to have an appropriate strategy. And we as the general public would want to know what that strategy should be because they are going to have an increased workload as it relates to greater provision of services. It feel like it's going back to those days of the hosting and the otherwise, but the idea is that it's still service on demand, but a cable and wireless, a Digicel, or any other provider of these cloud services, Amazon, whoever else, they would also need to be sharing with the public for whom they are providing the services their short, medium-term strategy, or is that a moot point?
I mean, I don't know if it's mute. All I can tell you is that having agreed to, the fact that whatever you do going forward, you're using somebody's services, right?
Services, yes.
And then what that leaves you to focus on as a company are your internal policies and protocols.
Yes.
Around how you build awareness internally, keep people trained, keep people aware. How do you recertify yourself? How do you do your audits and all those things that you can do, right? with the understanding that before you sign a contract, like Sean, I just switched data centers here in the US to a company that's located in Georgia and in Texas.
Yes.
And my lawyer basically said, look, Art, right away, they need to provide, one, their SOC 2 audit, the last one done in the last 18 months. Two, they need to provide us their data usage policy, their staff security training policy. Just like a whole list.
It's a whole list.
And that's it. You go down, you check them off. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, you don't have these three? I'm sorry. Next.
So Vivian is making a point here as well, and it's an excellent conversation we're having. As it relates to the short, medium term, and long-term strategy, if we move all those resources for the company into a cloud, as you suggested, as a service, Vivian made a very important point that when you have cost implications, if you go software as a service, platform, or infrastructure, and there are these varying price level, right? Price levels, which therefore means the companies who are reconciling that, listen, they are going to manage their cyber infrastructure. They will need to then budget accordingly based on those costs. That's what it will have to mean. They'll have to, that's where they will have to spend their time strategizing. Is that a correct point? That's where they will have to spend their time strategizing in terms of their overall business operation, where those technology costs are a part of the business operation, how they feel those costs into their quarterly or every couple of months budget or yearly budget.
Yeah, but that's not novel, right? Like
that's not novel. That's not
novel. Whether I use Dr. Campbell's hosting center or I use the one that I have in my building, yes, I still have to allocate CapEx and OpEx.
Yes.
So for me, the cost is moot. You still have to budget, right?
Yes.
You might find that it's easier though for mom and pop Mrs. Johnson's patty shop to sell patties online as a startup, because it's easier and cheaper for her to do that than it is for her to go and buy 5 servers from IBM, a whole bunch of Cisco switches, firewalls, routers, make them redundant, and pay rent and electricity for 2 buildings.
Yes.
That's why it's a leveler. It's a great leveler.
It's a great level. It's definitely, it's a very much a great level. It's a very great conversation we're having here, because I'm just looking at this long term. So it means, if there's a compromise or a breach, it is the service provider, based on the service level agreements that they have had with your organization, that have to take account and say to you what they have done to address the breaches, if they were in fact compromised. So that's an important point. And then at the local level of using the services in the cloud for your company and staff and operation, you just build the awareness campaigns around it. It's a very nice blueprint. It's a very nice blueprint.
Yes, sir.
I think it's a very nice blueprint. I think long term, however, these larger service providers, cloud service providers, fog cloud service providers, the economies of scale of maintaining and running them, they will have a lot more competition, and the cost of most of the services that we pay at a higher premium today, I would expect them to be dropping. I'd expect them to be dropping. So security costs might become even a little bit cheaper, medium to long term, as a part of that provision. That's another content I'm suggesting there. But this is a very important conversation. This is a very important conversation. So this is a complete pivot. It's a complete pivot, colleagues, based on what is suggested. Is there any other views on this point? Yes, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah. So with everyone buying their services from the cloud, so all you need is being innovative in the way you combine your ideas, and then you outsource your services.
Yes, sir.
So what will happen is that we'll have these specialized entities that will employ these specialized skill sets. So what does it offer the challenge for the universities and the colleges and the training organization and for employment within small island states then. Can we create our own competing services?
Yes.
Will we be able to do that? Are we are gonna have to pick that what we can compete in and develop those as distinctive areas of competencies where we can compete rather than trying to do everything?
That's an excellent. I mean, if you take a look at Jamaica right now, and I don't know about colleagues who, if you're tracking it, but a company called MCS offers
Yes.
payroll as a bureau, right?
Service,
So
yes, we are tracking it.
Right. So payroll as a service is a necessary next step, because as a professor in HR, I can tell you that the whole idea behind having my own payroll department is a last century concept. Payroll has become a commodity. You can commoditize the concept of payrolls because we all know what the tax levels are. We know what all of the rules are from one government to another. And so you can see where a company like MCS said, okay, let me bundle this up. I have my equipment in a cloud, and we will connect to your HR, Dr. Campbell, and pull the payroll, and we'll run it. And then we'll do the ACH into all the employees' bank accounts. So HR is no longer writing deposit slips, sending a bearer to NCB and to Scotia, and all that stuff. And HR isn't actually running and calculating payroll. They just know that at the end of the pay period, the broker pulls the data or they push it and it's done. So we've got one sitting in Jamaica that I know of. There's one in Guyana as well that's being developed. And so to your point, yes, this now allows us to now create what I call value-added services, Dr. Campbell, because we're no longer sitting here worrying about the capital required to build our own telephone company.
That's right.
Those days
that's
are
right.
gone.
It has completely shifted.
It's a new world, and so I think that more companies are going to start creating services. For example, since we're stuck on HR for a second here, Doc. Recruitment as a service.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole Caribbean jobs thing is about to evolve, whether it wants to or not.
That's our next Caribbean thought leadership conversation. Thank you for the intro, the early intro on the week of July 4th. But you're right about that. That's another major disruptor right there. Excellent point. To the fact that the two questions that were asked here as it relates to the strategy, and then assuming that we have a good strategy. The good strategy is suggested in that everything now is farmed out to these services and you manage them on demand. All right, I get that. So an attack occurs, it's managed through the service provider, or it may never even be seemingly an attack to you, because the service provider has done all the due diligence in terms of people, process, and technology. So, Art, boy, you should write a book, you should write a book. You should write a book, my friend. You should write a book. So when you step back,
I'm busy teaching, Prof.
You're busy teaching. you need a little downtime. We're going to need a little downtime. It's a good point. Very good point. So in terms of the two questions, I think we have decimated the floor. That if we have everything running as a service, the cost then becomes an experience. You pay for what you use, and as the organization you manage internally, and you build the awareness campaigns for your staff to understand how they use technology as a commodity. So, it's a brilliant cycle to the conversation. But now I'm going to put the last question on the table and look for us to deliver, because it's a very interesting one. And as a matter of fact, here in Jamaica, the university goes to joint select committee this week on it. So what is the role of cybersecurity research then in the universities, given all of this conversation? And let me not limit it to universities. The universities, the private sector, and the government in solving these type of issues relating to how we manage the cybersecurity infrastructure. Do you think there's a distinct role for each of these actors? And what are the roles you see, and what are the issues you see on earth with respect of each of the actors? I have some definite views about the universities, which I share, but let me open that up to the floor in a meaningful way. Anybody can start. If no one start, then I will start it. All right. So here's a view of the university side. The universities. So I'm speaking as University of Technology Jamaica, but universities across this region are higher education or academic institutions, full stop. We are practitioners of innovation. So for example, we take students into our curriculum, we train them to either go and manage the technologies for companies. And the fact of the matter is, to do that, we have to break stuff. We have to break stuff. So you teach a student ethical hacking 101 in the university. What we have to do is put a sandbox around the university. I recall in 2007, 2008, when we started, about 4 years into our programs, students were learning so many things. They started to go out there and practice it in the public. You know, you bring down networks, bring down environments. You know, at the local telecoms, they were stealing interesting things like PIN numbers and so on, and selling them downtown Kingston. You know, selling them downtown Kingston, you know, to buy breakfast and all kind of things. There's some silly things students do, but then it introduced the fact in 2009 that the government in Jamaica had to introduce the cybersecurity bill, because what the harm would have been is that if you started having all of these cyber hacks without a penalty or regulation to deal with it, then you know you'll have problems. And in 2021, we still have that cybersecurity legislation. But the big thing is, with data protection and cybersecurity legislation, the common man in the street, if he breaches relating to simulating a technique to protect read jewelers, right, or to protect an HR function, if he's in the street doing that, he should be sent to prison based on cybersecurity legislation if he's doing it maliciously. But students and professors in the universities who are simulating HR systems, looking at how to protect them, carrying out penetration tests, you mentioned the penetration test earlier, should we have a sandbox to say, well, when we do these kind of tests, although the law might say, listen, you should practice no hacking, it's necessary for us to do something called ethical hacking. Politicians don't really understand that, you know, or even some parts of the legal community don't understand what they mean by ethical hacking, because two things shouldn't be in the same sentence. So we are arguing to support all the things we have discussed this evening, like a University of Technology Jamaica. We create a sandbox and ask for legislative protection from government for the sandbox. What am I opening up here? A Pandora's box? I think the academic institutions to continually promote research and innovation in security is very necessary to combat the various types of challenges that can happen, not just for today, but tomorrow and future, including these zero-day attacks and so on, and study them properly, etc. But we need a sandbox to protect us. And when we have the sandbox, it means that we can do the testing, we can do the innovations, we can produce the products, we can send them out to market, we can, in other words, all the things we are doing, which you had said, for example, art, and you can go to this company and do this and do that. I'm sure we have started probably from behind an innovation space, albeit in a university or a private company, where they were able to do that without fear of the law coming against them. Shouldn't we have that in this region? But we don't.
Well, I think that there are lots of ways to get to the end state, right? And one of the things we have to be careful of is that we don't look at the end and try to start there.
Okay.
Right? So if we say we need to, and I'll use the term sandbox loosely, which really is your play environment, right?
Yes.
I mean, you should go build your sandbox. You get funding from your board and you build your environment. The execution is the issue. You know, so as a private sector company, I don't worry about you and your your sandbox at the university. My issue is when you target the edge of my network, right?
Yes. Yes.
So what I'm
Yes.
saying though is, I think a first step would be for the university in collaboration with private sector to do a good deed would be to offer as a service, starting with a mutual non-disclosure agreement. Let's just start there. That binds you to privacy, anything you detect. And so that would make me, as the head of the private sector company, a bit more comfortable, because now you are going to do this test. You're going to help me understand. You're going to surface, you're going to reveal, you're going to expose things that I necessarily must know that I was not aware of, so I can now go ahead and protect my entity, right? It's really starting with you communicating with your potential clients that this is a service, so they know, and you do a non-disclosure agreement. Both parties are in agreement that you will, whatever you identify, you are bound by this agreement. You can't go on a forum like this and go, hey guys, so Sabrina, guess what I saw when I did a hacking test at NCB?
That's right. That's
you
right.
Can't do that. And it's the NDA that will begin to get people comfortable. You know, we can't wait for government to solve everything. They can't, and they shouldn't be expected to. And I think that's the reason why we sit around as a region 11 years behind what else is going on the planet before we get anything done, because we have to be careful of government overreach. But we need them to come up with stuff. But I think UTech, the UWI, NCU, UCC, which interestingly, I've been affiliated with all four of them.
Yes, indeed, yes.
could easily reach out to private sector. How do I know this? Every semester, right, at UWI, Arthur Lockjack in Trinidad, for our MBAs in HRIS, we do an intervention in a private sector company in Trinidad. I brought the program to Mona in January, and we are in the middle of an intervention of a company right now in Jamaica. I can't tell you the name.
Right.
We're transforming their HR. And there's a non-disclosure signed between the UWI and the private sector company and the professor as well. So all three of us. So I have to be held to that NDA. The university is held to it. And of course, the client, they're not going to say anything, but they've signed as well. So I think what I'm saying, Sean, the framework exists and is a live, living thing.
That's correct.
If UTech wants to do its part, then, so to speak, and if you have your sandbox environment, meaning you've got your equipment, your skilled people, and all the other stuff, and you want to now get data, well, then let's go talk to the private sector companies.
Right. So, and I take that point. So you have the technical sandbox to do that, but then there's a need for a legislative sandbox. And let me qualify the legislative sandbox. The issue of then supporting a private sector company or even a government agency would be such that if you're running an environment with students and professors, as you say, those persons outside of this legislative sandbox, if they breach it, the whatever extent of the law supports under the cybersecurity legislation, those persons would have to go actually have to go become subjected to them. It would not be a responsibility of the university. It would not be a responsibility of the private sector organization or the government entity who were in the sandbox experimentation.
It's how you write the NDA, Sean. If you want to include in the NDA our government's legalities,
yes,
and then everyone's bound by it, and you get on with your service.
And you get on with the service. Okay. Because one of the things that we are seeing in the reality of life is that as we see data protection coming, as we see all the provisions coming, things like data harvesting and moving data over into environments to mine it and simulate it for security experiments to generate new products and or service or insights from data, which I think Bevel was making reference to earlier. We need the data. That in itself, in its pure form, if it is not properly procured, can be seen as a breach and with some liabilities. So as the academic institutions, the sandbox should give the type of protections for institutions, not just UTech alone, but institutions on a whole, academic institutions on a whole, that have to experiment and have to break things. And in security, we have to break things, which sometimes seem a complete violation of what security means as a part of that remit. But it's a good point you raised. So the NDA should also provide some level of binding to what the sandbox is doing. And once that is explicitly agreed on with all the actors here, then that will actually solve the problem. That needs to be happening. All right, that's a fair enough point.
Yeah, when we said to Company X in Trinidad and Company Y in Jamaica, in fact, there are two companies in Jamaica that we've kind of taken through our UEMONA HRIS intervention. When we told them, look, here's the school's NDA, and oh, by the way, the service is free. Then suddenly was like, yeah, sure, come on, let's do it. Everybody's jumping on. So what I'm saying is, you know, we're not sitting around waiting for some big, huge 10 commandment thing to come down.
Yes, indeed.
There are simple ways to get started, and private sector is willing to work with us in academics to move the thing. And it's happening. So it's not even like I'm saying to you, here's what we should do.
You're doing it.
That's what we're doing.
You're doing it. As a matter of fact, I like what you're saying, because even within the sandbox we're talking about, this very argument of the awareness training and development and framework. I'm actually, because of you and the team that have been at this with me a couple of weeks now, I'm actually spending a little bit more time looking at the awareness elements, you know, because they do affect the outcomes here. So it's a really good conversation we're having this Sunday afternoon on July 4, 2021. You know, the space of, you know, cybersecurity and its leadership and how it affects us in this pandemic, rise of ransomware, some very distilling views about how we approach this space, you know, a complete pivot from how we started the conversation, which is what we do on Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership. We pivot based on the thinking and the minority mindsets that are required sometimes to view a problem and its solution. I'm going to open the floor for any final comments as we wrap up this session, and I do have to respect the fact as well, Art, that it's, you know, happy independence if you do celebrate it up there. But I mean, let me welcome any final thoughts or comments on today's podcast before we wrap up. Thank you, Dr. Forrester, so that you have to leave. Thank you very much for coming. Any final thoughts or views from our guests this afternoon on these views? You know, any final thoughts?
Well, what I have to say, it's a very timely topic, and we recognize that risk is ever present in doing business in the digital space. And this evening, the talk has zeroed in on the importance, the critical importance of awareness, of education. You know, someone tells me that no matter how you get it, education costs. You know, whether you have to suffer the consequence of being ignorant or you went to school, you have to pay for education. So businesses must educate its employees, its stakeholders about the ever-present cyber security risk, because we know that many of the issues, if we would just practice common sense which for me is really capital sense. If we practice common sense, many of the slip-ups that escalate into major issues could have been minimized or contained. So that's from one perspective. We expect that as we get more disruption from digitalization, that we will see more and more brazen efforts being made to challenge the status quo, because as the economies of the world, the job market, employment as we know it shifts, so too the critical assets and resources that we use to define who we are. As they shift, then we can expect to see more challenges in the future. So organizations must prepare themselves, and IT leaders have to think critically about these risks, think about what next, what kind of technologies are coming on the horizon, what kind of challenges will they pose for us in terms of security, because data being that currency that is going to define anything that we do, how will we protect it? How will we rely on it in terms of its integrity? Because the integrity of data is very important to what we do. And we have seen in recent past how individuals are using data and just changing them in various forms and creating all kinds of conspiracies, and people are believing fake and not knowing that it's fake. How do we carry out those responsibilities and at the same time remain authentic and make it easy for people to do business in a digitized space without unnecessarily burden them? Because we know that as we ask for people to create passwords and to create authentication and do all kinds of stuff like this, if we were to follow the traditional route of getting all the unique passwords and trying to remember them, many people have long given up on that, and we see the weaknesses in all of that. So it is going to be a continuing challenge. It is going to be a challenge for the social scientists and the psychologists, as well as the computer scientists and all the other scientists coming together and seeing how best we can create unique ways of creating businesses and exploiting opportunities in as easy as possible a manner.
Okay, it's a task that, is a task, but I take up the challenge gladly, because I think this awareness space it's an opportunity, but equally it has its challenges, but we embrace it going forward. Any other thoughts on today's conversation, or would you have agreed that we said it all? And if we have said it all, then we would come to the end. But I think this has been a great session today, very thoughtful. The podcast will be pushed out shortly, and I see a lot of things we could write about Sir Art in terms of short essays and books and so on. I mean,
you've been trying to get me to write a book. All right.
Yes. There's one about the new CEO that we were discussing, but I'll get back to you soon on that one. Get back to you soon on that one. So this is so today on Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership, we have done ourselves justice over the time today. It has been a pleasure being your host. Thanks to Dr. Arnett Campbell. Thanks to all our guests, Arthur Fid, Vivian, Forrester, Bevel Wooding, Carmena MacArthur. I'm just seeing, I don't want to not miss a name, Dr. Claire Craig, all the persons who are actively contributing. I'd like to thank all those who are here as well, who were observing and listening to the conversation. I sincerely hope that you also found it stimulating. So leave a message or a comment in the podcast when it is posted. And thank you all again on this July 4, American Independence Day, for being a part of Caribbean Technology Thought Leadership 101. From wherever you are in the diaspora, albeit also in the Caribbean, I'm here in Kingston, Jamaica. It was my pleasure being your host for today's session. And I'd like to thank you all and enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon for what it is worth. I want you to have a peaceful one. Thankfully, the rain has stopped in somewhat here in the city. And I think the storm is passing the island now in a good way. So, you know, we do probably have some water on the road, but I'm thankful that I'm not seeing any major damage otherwise, you know, some impassable roads, but I'm not hearing anybody with any problems. I probably need to listen to the 7 o'clock news local tonight and follow. But it was great having you all. And
all the best.
yes, man. If no more comments, I'm going to
All right.